Hi there, and welcome to Telios Unplugged, where we break down faith and not just any kind of faith, but faith in the Lord Jesus Christ. We are so glad to have you join us today. We've been on a journey where we have conversations, so myself and my husband, Dr. Nathi, where we really explore what it looks like practically to say you are a believer and some of the principles that apply to daily life. So if you have not yet done so, please subscribe to our channel, Telios Unplugged, so that you can have these episodes and watch them, share them, like as well. And we do hope that they are building you up even as you take this journey with us. So we know that in the world that we are living in today, there are some concepts or principles that people live by, but I want us to dive into, especially around dating. So, exploring what dating actually looks like. How do you have a healthy relationship as you are a believer, even as you are preparing? I would say ultimately as you are preparing for marriage, but also how do you set boundaries? Because that's where we started as well. Before we were married, we were a young couple dating and working towards that. But how do you set boundaries in a relationship? How do you bring up topics such as purity and sexuality? How do you also engage even with your family or a community? Because we also believe in the power of community and having people that walk the journey with you. So let us just start a bit maybe on what dating means and what is the essence of dating from your understanding, especially now, especially in the age that we are living in now.
Yeah, well, I'm not a dating expert, but I think we can endeavor to have a conversation about it. And I think the space of relationships and friendships becomes a bit tricky in terms of we can't prescribe, but I think we can bring about the biblical principles that guide and actually safeguard people who are in relationships. So I think for me, dating, particularly if you look at what it is in the context of the modern world, I think it's an attempt to get to know one another by sharing, I guess, premaritally, sharing emotions with one another and sharing a journey of friendship and of love. And I think that is the purest form of what dating would be. It would be an experience, or I don't want to call it an experiment, but an experience of sharing love with between a male and a female, and with that experience preparing you ultimately for functionality within the context of marriage. I think that is what I would want to define dating as from a, let me say, church traditional point of view.
Okay, so let's just make a disclaimer then. I want us to make a disclaimer that we are talking about dating. So, a relationship between two people who are not married, not dating in the marriage sense, but two people who are in a relationship but are not yet married.
Yeah.
Okay, so I know that the Bible does not necessarily talk about dating, right? It does not necessarily say this is what you must do as a young man or as a young woman when you are dating. But I do believe that there are fundamental principles or the ethos that the Bible would have. Is there anything, as just as a start, before we even dive deeper into maybe some of the questions that most people have, or even some of the things that we learned when we were dating, but some of the key things in your view, or in your view, the principles that the Bible has when it comes to dating?
Yeah, well, you're right. I mean, the Bible does not necessarily specify dating. And the Bible, you must remember, the Bible is written in quite a historical times, in pre-millennial times. So there is cultural contexts that don't apply. And even if we wanted to go and find dating, we wouldn't. Primarily because, for instance, you look at Mary, the mother of Jesus. When she got married, she's young, she's a teenager, because that is the context of marriage within the Middle East. And to be betrothed actually meant that she was already handpicked to marry into the family of Joseph. So that might have happened 3 years, 4 years before she gets married. Sometimes without necessarily a knowledge of who she is to marry. She might know the name of a person, but not necessarily have a relationship with that person until they show up and marry that young girl. So if you look at culturally and contextually, even within our African context, our grandmothers got married quite early. They would get married at the age of 16, at the age of 15. And so there is no necessarily a historical basis for it from a cultural point of view, rather than to say that the Bible is actually silent. It's just culturally, it is not captured within the Judeo-Islamic, Middle Eastern, Arabic environment. So I think those are the limitations that you would see from the Bible. But can you then find different relationships in the Bible that suggest or bring us to understand what it would have meant for two people to be attracted to one another, then marry? Yes, you have Boaz, you have Ruth, and their story is literally that of love at first sight. You know, when someone sees Ruth and he falls in love with her, pursues a relationship with her. We even get the full view of how he attempts to kind of start dating her. You know, so that I think there are elements in the Bible that can form a basis of what biblically and Christian lifestyle-wise dating should be. But we must understand that context culturally, that it might be difficult to pinpoint instances specific to dating, though there are also spaces where we can learn.
Is there one thing for you, one thing that you learned? I know that we once had this conversation. We had the opportunity to share with a group of young believers about some of the things that we wish we knew, we had known before getting married in our dating season. Is there just one thing that you want to perhaps repeat today?
Yeah, well, I think I wanted to, as we have a discussion, I wanted us to perhaps touch on the fact that I think dating, particularly today, 2025, is not as clear cut. It has a big spectrum. I'm talking about, for instance, the age of starting to date. I'm sure parents would agree that a grade 1 boy from time to time may mention having a girlfriend at school. And it speaks to the importance of what we must model as dating, particularly for the church. Because when the church loses its mechanism to to check and to safeguard what we mean by dating, we might lose the narrative completely. So if you look at a child that is in primary school, what is dating for them? Is this just playful? Or is it that they are modeling from social media and engaged in sexual behavior in the name of dating? Because that might be their perception of dating, that dating means you are in love with someone, you can, if you want, become sexual with them, and so forth. And that explains as well what we are seeing in our community, teenage pregnancies and all of that. So, and even the rise of abuse and violence within genders. So I think we must be careful to contextualize. I always say this, that if I had my way, I would outlaw dating within the church space. I would say there's no such thing as dating for a believer.
Okay.
There is room for courtship. There is room for intentionally building a relationship with someone towards marriage. But for the casual sense of the word, there is no room for it because it only brings us to experiment as the secular world will determine, rather than what biblically will be allowed. So I think for me, it's important to have the conversation of when do we see our children as parents starting to date, and what interventions should parents have as balances and checks to start the conversations perhaps earlier. Not necessarily the conversation of dating isolated, but the implications of what dating would be for that child. Is it an implication of developing personality, sexual personality? So if it's a child and she starts associating with other girls, and she's developing a personality of lesbianism, for instance, what is the responsibility of parents within that? So I think for me, that spectrum and sensitivity of what dating means today is important, and it's an important discussion. So for me, I think that is one area where I think parents must play a more active role. And then, of course, then there's what I would call healthy dating. It's healthy in the sense that this is now a maturing late teen, perhaps even young adult, right? Who is now getting into a space of wanting to know and exercise, let me call physiologically, their development. And I must say that even that is still dangerous waters, because then you are dealing with people who are actually, by all physiological accounts, ready for sexual encounters with one another. So this is high emotional drives, high libido environment, high testosterone environments, high attraction. This is prime. Physiologically, by the age of 18, a woman is at the prime of making babies. And that then must be an area where we are aware, even within dating, because that means that there's higher chance there of losing purity, of getting sexually involved within the space of dating. And so I think there's a lot of conversations, but for me, that spectrum is important to understand. What do I wish I knew? I think I not necessarily knew, but I think I wish I had these conversations more within the Christian space that I was founded at. I wish they didn't happen outside. I wish I didn't have to hear boys, whilst who are playing soccer, talk about masturbation, and for me to go explore it in the light of what they said. I wish the church had those conversations with me.
Yeah, I agree with you, because that's another thing for me in terms of the importance of a community that actually speaks about these things, but a safe community and a trusted community. Because the only time, perhaps it might have changed for the younger generations now, maybe their parents are more open about it. But the first time you hear about these things, as you say, maybe your friend saying something, or maybe even in primary school, someone starts gossiping or telling you that, oh, this person and this person are actually having sex, and you're shocked. What do you mean having sex? I don't know anything about sex. No one has spoken to you about it. And you start to wonder, what does it actually mean? Does it mean that I must now have a boyfriend because maybe my peers are starting to have boyfriends? So how do we start talking about these things? How do we build communities of accountability and trust? Because you are a pastor to a fairly young generation. We have members that are young, we have people who are older than us, but the bulk of them being younger than us. How do you foster that community? Is it something that you would talk about openly, even to members or anyone that is younger? And how do we take it beyond the church to get it into the spaces where the people are? Because there are people outside the church that may not necessarily subscribe to the biblical way of dating or relationships, but they would want to know, how is dating supposed to be done? Do I need a mentor in terms of sexuality? Who do I run to? Do I go to YouTube to listen to someone speak about it, or do I build it for myself? So how do we actually do this?
Yeah. So the first thing is church is not, it's part of the building blocks, but it's not the foundation of society. Family is. Family is. So conversations should happen within the context of family. And interpretation should come from family then to churches. When God initiated life on earth, particularly human being life, He didn't start with a church, He started with family. So that's important to reflect on, because you realize that before God instructs us to go and have buildings and buy chairs and instruments and play music, He actually instructs or imagines that life, eternal life, would be lived from the auspices of a family as the arching environment to cultivate godly character, godly life, you know. So we start there. I think there needs to be more engagements within families. And I know there are limitations within our context in South Africa, in particular in Africa, even as a young continent as we are. There are many challenges with childhood-headed families, child-headed families. So there are children who are left on their own to figure it out. And then there are issues of single parenting that are there, and you may be juggling as a parent, as a mom, as a father, juggling between domestic issues, battling to send your children to school from a financial point of view. And those conversations literally take a back seat, because from the hierarchy point of view, in terms of needs, they're just too far up the hierarchy of needs to be discussed. And that is why I think if you look at the upper class, or let us say the middle class and upwards, those are the people who are having conversations with their children around sexuality and around dating, because I think the other issues of survival might have been taken care of already. So I think we have to be sensitive to that, even as we are throwing back the responsibility towards family. We have to be to understand that. Then what is then the response of the community of believers, even outside of a church setup, is to see ourselves as extended resources for families, particularly families that are headed by children. And I think from a, let me say, from a knowledge point of view, when I say children-headed families, I'm still talking about the teenagers that are being looked after by their 90-year-old grandmother.
Yes.
Because from a knowledge point of view, they wouldn't want to rely on the grandmother for knowledge, particularly around sexuality, around what they need to do with their bodies. So at the end of the day, they're left on their own. So it is the responsibility, I think, of the community to see itself as an extended resource. As a father, within the space where I live, are there children that I can identify that I may perhaps begin to influence positively? And of course, there are still sensitivities to that. There's still fear to that, because our communities are also engulfed by violence and other sinister characters that may even want to groom. And I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about godly modeling of character.
Yeah.
So there are many issues that I think are affecting the greater community. But I think let's equip families. Let's equip families. Let's get to a place where the single mom doesn't have to be the only person teaching the young man how to be a man. Perhaps there may be other resources and other spaces where people can get mentorship from. And I think in that way, the church extends itself to the community. But I think also to answer your question on the church itself, what the church needs to do.
Yeah.
I think the church needs to be sensitive to development in terms of childhood development and teenage formative years. Yes, let's have church for the toddler who is just coming to play and draw and color a book and sing songs. But let's also be sensitive to the fact that there's an 8 to 12-year-old who is starting to formulate ideas out of curiosity. And those are the people that perhaps who are not paying attention to the fact that whenever they touch themselves in a particular way, there are certain emotions that are being activated. They have no one to talk about these things with. And yes, of course, we are pushing back that the schools should not teach these things explicitly. But then where is this child going to find information even about what they seem to be experiencing? So I think that it's important to have real sensitive conversations with them, not necessarily explicit, but starting to bring about an idea of what it means to be friendly, what love is, and what it means to honor your body, even at that young age.
Yeah.
Because the child is expected to dress like a girl, but the child is more comfortable dressing like a boy, and that curiosity is punished rather than interventions being made to nurture and to redress if we need to redress, but in an environment that seems to empower. And I think that's where the church may be lacking, particularly that group. And then, of course, there are teenagers. And there's what we call teen church these days, I'm passionate about that. I feel like they should be allowed to play their own instruments, sing their own songs, and even do their own sermons from time to time, So if we have that environment, and it's not always there, we are limited as a church for many reasons, resource-wise. But if it's there, I think that becomes an environment where children can really, teenagers can really formulate identity within the society. And that identity doesn't have to be sexual.
Yeah.
And I think that's another conversation we're not having as the church, is that identity is not sexual. As much as the world is insisting that teenagers should identify, because that's the battle our children are facing at schools, in the environment, is that they must define themselves. And the insistence is that they must define themselves in these years from 12 through to 18. You must say, I'm heterosexual, or you must say, I'm gay, or you must say, I'm bisexual. If you don't say that, it means you don't have a category. And even if you go and from a church perspective and say there is only one way to interpret gender, you have still not answered the question of why in the first place is there a choice? Because the child who is insisting, or it is insistent upon them to be heterosexual, they never get to understand even why was their choice to begin with. So I think there are many spaces where the church can intervene. I'm eager to talk about these things. We are a new church. We just turned 3 months, so we may not have all the answers, but I'm eager to have conversations with young people. As a medical practitioner, I do that a lot when I see teenagers in particular. Yeah, we chat a lot about their lives, about what they think about different things. And I don't impose my views, sometimes just for curiosity's sake.
Yeah, there are many things that you touched on there. I would have wanted to maybe talk about them a bit more, but I also want to streamline the conversation. But there are very crucial points that you made. For instance, the point about the environment within a family where you don't necessarily have role models, or you have the burden falling on a person who is perhaps not capable or doesn't have the luxury of being that model. I do know from my personal experience a few people that are single parents, women that are raising boys. And one of the biggest questions they have is, how do I actually raise a boy child as they are, especially when they start around 8 years? How do I start raising the boy child? And which people can I actually find to mentor this person to grow into a young man that is going to be a role model even in society? So those are some of the things. And I do think maybe someday we should have a conversation about it. But I want us to talk about purity and sexuality. Purity and sexuality in dating. When we did the episode on friendships, we spoke about whether males and females could be friends. Does that work? And our view on that. But I want us to explore what is purity in dating, And especially when there are different sides of purity, because sometimes we mistake purity to be just about sexual purity. That for the fact that you are abstaining from sex means that you are pure or you have purity. And that is not always the case, right? Because there is purity of mind, purity of heart, all that. So what does purity mean in the context of dating? And I want us to touch mainly on the sexuality part of it. We can touch on the other ones as well. But on the sexuality part, what does it look like? What does it mean? And how do young, especially young couples who are dating, how do you navigate a conversation around sexuality and purity as a believer?
And I think when you're saying sexuality, you're not talking about orientation.
No, not orientation. The fact that physiologically your body, and you touched on this as well, that physiologically your body is sending signals. It is sending signals that make you wonder, okay, what am I supposed to do now? Am I supposed to am I supposed to just sit, am I supposed to just sit and not listen to my body? But also, how do I sit? What is this tug of war that is usually there, even in believers dating? The tug of war between the body, the tug of war between the relationship, the tug of war between the spaces and the communities that you're exposed to. Because we know that sex is normalized in this age. It is a normal thing for people to be doing. Even outside of marriage, it has become so normalized that it has seeped even into the church, because at the end of the day, the church is also still part of this system where you find young people being influenced by what they see on social media, what their friends may be talking about, who are maybe not believers. But how do you bring it in? How do you have and walk this journey with someone who is a believer? You're a believer and the person is a believer, but it's your body, it's them, it's their body, it's the world. How do you navigate that?
Yeah. So what is the purpose of dating? You know, what is the purpose of dating within the context of Christianity? I don't know. What do you think is the purpose of dating?
I think the purpose of dating would be for getting married. For me, and I don't want to say that it is to get to know someone before you get married to them. It is not necessarily that. It is a preparation and a commitment journey. It is more, actually, for me, it is more a commitment journey than preparation. Because I personally don't believe in preparation for marriage from the sense of testing out what marriage could be outside of marriage. I don't believe that, because marriage can only be tested in marriage. And there are some things that you can do to prepare, in the sense of getting counseling, having mentors, being built up in what marriage is actually about, and preparing yourself for that. But outside of that, there's no preparation that you can say you are doing. So for me, that's not the purpose of dating. So the purpose is a commitment journey that you walk with another person to say, I am using this as a form of commitment to say that I am committed to getting into a covenant with you, which is marriage, and I am making preparations for that. It could be financial preparations. For instance, maybe as a man, you might say, I am taking this commitment journey with you, and as part of that journey, I want to make sure that I have a home prepared for my wife. So I am doing that. Or as a woman, you might say, yes, it is a commitment, but there are other things that I still want to do. Perhaps you might be saying that I still feel that I am a bit young to enter into a family or to enter into a covenant with you. I would have perhaps loved to pursue my studies. I would have perhaps loved to have done this for my family, but this is the journey that I am taking with you, and that time is going to come. So it is not for leisure. To me, it's not for leisure. It's not for testing out that, okay, I have a boyfriend, I'm going to test out if this person is the one. Dating for me is the thing that you enter into when you are ready to make and take that commitment journey. The thing that you say, okay, I have seen there is this person, I have observed, and I have maybe interacted or maybe not, but maybe perhaps you've interacted with them, but I have seen them and I think that I want to take some form of commitment journey with them. And you start having those discussions, you start exploring. So that for me is what the purpose of dating is.
Yeah. So I guess I will just inch on that. There's not much for me to add. I'm a conservative. I would have loved for people to abstain from even dating itself until such a time when those can be the reasons for dating. So when then you talk about purity within that space, I guess then we have to, I think, emphatically state, and without controversy or fear, that sex in particular is not for any other person than the person you are married to. You can't experience sex outside of a marital covenant with someone. That is why in the Old Testament, the Bible says that a man who breaks a woman's virginity must marry her.
Yeah.
It is not necessarily because it is of the patriarchal connotation, which I must say that it is there, the patriarchal connotation of that. But it is also because I think the Lord had placed so much value and so much honor in women and in their virginity, particularly when it comes to the fact that virginity is still used even now in the Bible to signify setting apart. Not necessarily to signify holiness, but to signify that this is set apart, is exclusive. So when you look at the Word of God speaking about the bride of Christ, and speaking about the bride of Christ as virgins or as a virgin, it is speaking about that sanctifying, setting apart. So I think that's what we must see purity as. We must see it as consecration unto God and a setting apart of my body for the sole use in marriage. In the book of Romans chapter 12, the Bible brings us to understand something. It says, in view of God's mercies. And then it goes to clarify what, before you get to chapter 12, there's clarity of what those mercies are. In view of God's mercies, which is redemption, sanctification, righteousness, justification, all of these are called the mercies of God, because outside of His generosity, they are not made available to us. We can't by merit achieve them. So I don't think that by any means when we say purity, we're talking about works of the flesh or righteousness by works. We're not talking about an attempt to keep yourself, but we're talking about an act of reasonable service. That is what Romans chapter 12 says. It says your body should be given to God as a living sacrifice, and not your mind, not your spirit, not your heart, but your body. Because, you see, it is important that we see Christianity as the indwelling and the operations of the Holy Spirit in our bodies. Not necessarily in the spiritual realm. You see, and we perceive spiritual war, we perceive all forms of spirituality, which is true. But all of that, it is to the effect that functionally, Christianity must be lived out in the body. So that is why the fruit of the Spirit is contrasted with the acts or the fruit of the flesh. Because the operations of the fruit of the Spirit are in the flesh, actually. Not even in my mind or even in the spiritual realm.
That's where you see them.
You have to. So they are operational and functional within the context of the body, you see. So it is an act of reasonable service to God to keep ourselves pure. Even in marriage, there is a sense of that word purity in marriage. When the Bible speaks of keeping the marital bed undefiled.
Yeah.
So that purity is not necessary. We're not imposing it on those who are unmarried to say that there is a standard that they are held higher than the ones who are married. No, even the ones who are married, there is a sense of purity that must be maintained, where our bodies are given as reasonable worship to God, and our bodies are, by reason of covenant, belong to the partner that I have, the one partner that I have, and not no one else, not even for self-indulgement.
Yes.
You see, so I think that's for me what is the context of purity is that keeping of the body, reasonably offering your body.
Yes.
As
It's not
service.
even keeping yourself for marriage. From
No,
what I'm
no.
getting, and that's the critical thing, right? Because I think, and I'm one of those people that for the longest time the belief was that you keep yourself pure for marriage. It's not I keep myself as a sacrifice to God, as the reasonable service to God. It was I am keeping myself for marriage. I am keeping myself for my husband, which is for me it's a shift, right? Because you now start to realize that, oh, it's not just about the husband, because it means even those who don't aspire to be married, that they are still required the purity. That it's not about whether you are going to get married, you aspire to get married or not. So for me, if you start to understand that it is that reasonable service unto God, then the shift even changes. Even as a young couple, when you are dating and you are in a relationship together, then it's not the conversation that you're having with one another is not, yes, we are waiting for marriage. Because I think that's the conversation that happens in most relationships, in most circumstances, that the man or the woman would say, no, but I am keeping myself for marriage. Let's wait, or let's walk this journey together to say we are waiting for marriage and we'll do it together. So the shift comes in that now, when you're having that conversation, it's not I am keeping myself for you for marriage. You are keeping yourself for me for marriage, and we'll explore this together. It is that I am keeping myself as a service to God, because my body, until I am married, belongs to the Lord. Your body, until you are married, belongs to the Lord. So you are keeping yourself for that, which then makes it now does not become a question, because I think where the line becomes blurred, before we get into what are the practical ways to have this discussion with the person you're in relationship with, is that you start to, I think where the compromise comes in is the fact that, okay, if I am keeping myself for you and you have made some form of commitment to me, then should I still be keeping myself? If I already know that you are my husband, or okay, not you are my husband, if I already know that you're going to be my husband, and you know that I am going to be your wife, then your mind starts playing tricks on you, because then if I'm keeping myself for this person who is going to be my husband, then should I really be waiting? Because I'm keeping myself for them. So whether we do it now or after we are married doesn't really make a difference. So I really like how you explained it. I think it also clarified in my mind a few things. So helped me understand really what waiting and purity is all about. So let's touch a bit on how to have this discussion, right? As a young couple, how do you initiate this kind of conversations? And where they've been initiated, how do you set boundaries? Or how do you begin to draw the line, or the accountability part? How do you bring it in?
Well, I think it should be in the forefront. It should be at the first date. That's how serious it is. And I think there are people who are trying and attempting to have that conversation early. And I think I've seen some people making some jokes around how a young lion would be crying after 3 weeks, crying for intimacy once he was told that it is off the table from the onset. So that was funny to look at. But it is important that there is clarity even when you are entering into this relationship, that first of all, this is not a sexual relationship.
Yeah.
And what purpose it is to serve. If that is put in front, I think you will have the opportunity to see those who are not willing to pay the price walk away, which is going to be better than having to battle it inside. But let's take it that these are well-meaning individuals, and they are struggling, keeping their hands off each other for various reasons, and they want to have the conversations so that boundaries are now set. So I think that it's important to bring in an accounting or an accountability partner. It's important. Not necessarily as in there is someone who must stand in between the two of you. But it's important to have this conversation even beyond the two of us. To say that we are dating and our intention is to stay pure from a sexual point of view, not to have sex with one another in all forms of that sex.
Yes, in all forms.
Yeah, in all forms of it, right? And that is important to communicate with other people that will hold you accountable. Outside of those accountability checks, what I've seen is that what you said is very true. Over time, there is a lack of rules, a lack of guards, because we are now used to one another. And that's where the transition is made between dating and partnerhood or partnership.
We must talk about
I
think it was
that transition is made nicely on the sand, there's no line. It's just sandy, then boom, you are in a situationship that is tantamount to marriage.
Yeah.
And because it can't be called marriage, it's called partnership.
Yes.
Which is the indulging of all liberties without the commitment of contractually committing to the person.
Without the covenant.
Without the covenant, Then you go to the lens of domesticating your lives together, planning your lives together. That blurry line, I think it's at the face of what you said, is this person is already committed to me, I'm already committed to them. We don't cheat we don't cheat. We are committed to one another and all of that. It's just an issue of resources, just an issue of that. So I think that it's important to have that person come in as an accountability check and a balance, but the conversation must be had. And it is important to clarify the reasons for it. It's quite painful, I think, for Christians, because there is a guilt component that you can't run away from. All well-meaning Christians will battle guilt once they start being sexual with one another.
Yeah.
And that guilt pattern is scarring in nature.
Yeah.
So I think for me, the most important thing, or why it's important to keep your hands off each other, is that the guilt that you're going to incur is paralyzing. It has implicating effects towards your sexuality going forward. The resentment of self and the resentment of your partner is not worth it. It will scar you. So to avoid those kind of elements, we have to stay off sex.
So in that context, do you just sit down, do you just be brave, just be courageous and say to your partner, or the person you're dating, that look, I want to have this conversation with you from the get-go? That you just say it from the get-go and say, this is what I believe in, this is how it is, so that you know upfront whether they are also buying into it or not. And as you said, it is it is easier for those to walk away than for you to be under the impression that, okay, this person is on board, and then some time later that scent starts coming in and the line is not there anymore. Okay, so just in perhaps as a closing, how do you navigate some of the challenges that are there in dating in our age? And some of the challenges, okay, maybe some people don't see it as a challenge, but some of the things that are existing in our age is the concept of online dating. Online dating, cultural differences in a way also comes up every now and then. Cultural in every sense of the word, whether you are from a different tribe, the other person is from a different culture. How do you navigate those kind of situations? Are you for online dating or not?
Well, online dating, I think for me it's okay to the extent that it's true. People are interacting online. Friendships are maintained online these days. I mean, I have one of my best friends who stays not more than 500 meters away from my house. We don't see each other. We call each other from time to time, but we don't see each other. So it means that life is happening online, That's the reality of where we are. So people meet online. People start conversations online. People start to interact with one another online. They say a safety issue to online dating purely, because you can also have people who their intentions is to exploit within that space. So there is obviously the sensitivities of safety around it. But I think online dating as a platform of initiation of relationships and conversations is okay, to the extent that it is pure also. I mean, there are people who would rather have you send them exposed pictures of yourself and all of those kind of things. And I think those become dangerous terrains for believers. That why even that environment can become very hypersexual as well. So it's quite important to be sensitive to what it is that you are doing even within the space of flirting and all of this online or what do you call it, messaging app conversations, right? Yeah. So I can't say much about it beyond that. But
yeah, except exercise caution.
No, we have caution. We have to, not just in dating, in everything, we have to exercise caution in business and all of that. So, but the world is like that. It's globalizing, it's internationalizing, and it's becoming a smaller village, including what you're talking about in terms of intercultural relationships and marriages. People marrying between tribes, between races, intercontinentally as well. So it's something that we are embracing. I mean, I'm a big proponent of preaching the gospel of Christ to the nations of the world, the peoples of the world. So I have no reservation in terms of people. But I think that it's just important. Of course, we as Africans will always navigate the issue of our families not being as readily as willing to integrate within that relationship. So the relationship between different tribes, people of different tribes, people of different languages, even natives in South Africa, a Zulu and a Pedi speaking person, there will always be frictional issues that you have to, me and you, Tsonga and Pedi. So outside of those, I don't think there is a limitation, to be honest, that should preclude people from marrying one another. It's that the Bible then advises us that we should not be unequally yoked. This should be a biblical arrangement from the perspective of between two, a brother and a sister in the Lord, as it were. I'm a big proponent of that, a big proponent, because I think it's important to see ourselves as believers, as a people of God, as part and parcel of the household of God, to the extent that with everyone outside of that, an outsider, And it's important that we find ourselves in relationships that nurture the values that we have. Solomon had a problem. His problem was that he was marrying from everywhere.
Yes.
The issue was not the many wives. The issue was the gods that the wives were bringing with them. So in a woke environment, sage environment, traditional environment, spiritual environment, it's quite important that we don't put ourselves in situations where we have to debate our Christianity.
Yeah. I think we'll talk about it another day. This is a packed topic. I'm realizing that there is also, with the cultural thing, there is a testing beliefs. Because there are people who believe there is God, but are they born again?
Yeah.
And also we must, in my view, we must shy away from this concept of, no, Lord, I will preach to them. I will convert them. They will tend to the Lord as I preach to them, and just continue with the relationship, because you find yourself in a compromising position.
Yeah.
The unequal yoking as well, to say, are you really going to test how strong you are and test how strong you can convert someone by doing that?
Yeah.
So it's something.
No compatibility. I think perhaps let me bring this balance with that.
Yes.
There will still be compatibility issues even amongst believers.
Yes.
Yeah. So,
Yeah, absolutely.
Someone having come to confess that they are of the Lord must not necessitate a lowering of your guards.
Yeah.
I mean, Simon the sorcerer was clearly not born again.
Yeah.
After asking that he must purchase the Holy Spirit, for argument's sake. So I think there's room to exercise caution and discernment.
Yeah.
In every way possible. Yeah.
Absolutely. Is there anything, words of wisdom, that you want to share about dating?
No, pray. Prayer is everything. You can't, as a believer, rely on yourself. Be proud to the extent that you don't pray. I'm not saying pray from a show me Lord perspective. I'm talking about prayer. Have a lifestyle of prayer.
Yes.
A lifestyle of prayer will safeguard you from falling into the pit, from falling into traps. The obsession that is there amongst people who are of age to marry, the obsession to pray for marriage is one to avoid. Because you actually dampen or clog your ears when all you are exercising yourself is to requests. So when I'm talking about prayer, I'm not talking about prayer for me. I'm talking about spirituality as an exercise. Pray.
Communion with
God. Pray, because that will become the edge that will allow for you to have discernment, to know what ought to be done, to respond adequately, even to relationships that are there to utterly waste your time. You can't know unless you are prayerful. So if there is any advice I can give anyone who is young, is invest yourself to prayer. Invest yourself to prayer. Pray fast. Take all the time to be a prayerful person.
Yes.
That is the biggest investment you can make into your marriage, even without the person to marry. It's prayer. Not praying for marriage, not praying for the wedding, not praying for God to send people, but to pray, to be prayed up.
Yeah.
I would advise that, because I think I've seen that the obsession is to pray for marriage, is to pray for people to be brought by God. And whilst that is a reasonable prayer point to make, when it becomes the only focus
thing
of prayer, we lose everything there is to benefit from knowing the voice of God, even when it relates to marriage. It's like praying for money all the time. Yeah, when you just pray for wealth to be increased, for doors to be open, what you lose is the ability to be sensitive to what door is godly and what door is not, because money will come. But it is not all money that will come from God. Just like men will come women will come, but not all of them will be the right people. So if your obsession is just to pray to get someone, that prayer, I don't think it will go a long way into sustaining you. That's it.
Yeah. No, thank you for that. I do agree with what you are saying. And I'm just, I want to laugh a bit about this because I do know that, okay, perhaps not from, I wouldn't say personally or experiencing it firsthand, but I do know a few people that pray for marriage. It's especially, I don't think, maybe we are speaking from a from a point of privilege because we got married while within the normal age range of marriage, and we don't understand how it feels to be a bit older and still not married. We don't know how that feels, but yeah. Thank you so much. Thank you for this conversation. I do think it was a lovely conversation. I personally benefited from it. And thank you to you as well who is watching this episode as we journey together. This is part 2 of our relationship series that we've been doing. Do check out the one that we did on friendships so that you can know how to build lasting and godly friendships. But while you are at it, share this with someone who will benefit from it. Share it with someone who is single. You know that person is going through the most. Perhaps they are the person praying for marriage, but share it with them as well. And until next time, stay blessed.